This is the Voice of Early Childhood podcast. Hey everyone, a quick message from me, the founder of the Voice of Early Childhood. I wanted to thank you all for listening and tuning into the podcast. We're always ensuring we provide valuable content for our listeners and viewers as we share diverse voices from across the early childhood community. And we're always encouraging you all to share your voice too. So if you have a specific topic in mind or a guest you'd like to hear from, let us know. Just fill in the contact us form via the link in this episode description. And if you haven't already done so, please do subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you are listening on. This helps us to keep sharing voices and thought-provoking content. Thank you all for being part of the Voice of Early Childhood community. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Voice of Early Childhood podcast. My name is Angelica Solinska. I'm your host. And today I'm joined by Rachel Tapping and Charlotte Shelley from Pikler UK, who are also the sponsor of this podcast. So thank you both for joining today. And a big thank you to Pikler UK for sponsoring and supporting you both to be here talking about a very interesting topic.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting us.
Yeah.
Yes. Great to have you both on. So just a very quick introduction, and you can kind of extend on this more if you'd like to. So Charlotte is an early years consultant and Rachel is a Piklerian early childhood advisor, and they're both on the Pikler UK management committee. So for everyone who's listening, today we're discussing the Pikler triangle, which is something that many educators and parents might have come across and know it as a piece of small-scale indoor climbing equipment. But do we really know what the Pikler triangle is, where it originates and its purpose, and more behind it, the meaning behind it? So Rachel and Charlotte, I think a good place to start is probably to understand where the Pikler triangle came from. So introducing the Pikler part of the triangle. So would you like to give us an overview of the Pikler approach, please, initially?
Okay. So Emmi Pikler was a Hungarian pediatrician, and the potted version is just that she created a sort of approach to childcare that trusts the child and talks about building really responsive, attuned relationships with the child. There's also a lot around free movement development, which is where the triangle partly comes in, as well as self-initiated play. And she began her sort of studies and developing her practice back in the early 1900s, sort of early to mid, but the work that she has been doing, that she did at that time, has been followed up and backed up by so much of today's modern science, and which were, and sort of underpins the theories and ideas that she had. And so the Pikler triangle is just one very small part of this very big sort of whole sort of approach to very respectful, attuned childcare.
So Emmi Pikler developed her ideas through an institution in Budapest in Hungary, and the first child that she actually kind of gave the reins to, I suppose, to be able to develop in their own natural way, was her own daughter. And so she kind of had this opportunity to be able to kind of leave Anna, her daughter, to develop, as naturally as possible, like the way that maybe a deer would, go to walking, over a number of months. And giving that freedom, she could really see all of the developmental stages that were possible, because by not propping Anna to sitting, she wasn't sort of jumping ahead of any of the stages. Right. And so that when she was given the opportunity to develop her work further through the institution, she was able to do that with hundreds of children, and she saw just how incredibly competent children are if we give them the space to be able to develop at their own rate. And so when we look at the triangle, we're not just looking at it from a physical development point of view, we're also thinking about the free play aspect, because essentially it is a piece of play equipment. And for us as practitioners, it's that opportunity to watch what the child can do rather than what we expect them to do. And so the Pikler triangle is so beautiful because it kind of gives us that in front of our very eyes. So each rung that the child approaches, they do that naturally, one rung at a time. They might climb up it and down it. It might take hours before they move on to the next rung, but we're so busy focusing on the top that we actually lose sight of all of those stages that are essential for a child to really hone their skills, I suppose.
And reading your article as well, it kind of all of this now, what you're saying really makes sense, because the triangle seems to be a bit of a metaphor for the whole Pikler approach in a way. That's kind of how I'm understanding it, not just merely play equipment. So I don't actually know anything about the Pikler triangle apart from having an awareness that it exists. So, not until I've read your article and now talking to you about this. But yeah, from reading your article, I can see that the triangle seems to kind of represent the wider Pikler approach, including that focus on observation without intervening, like you mentioned, and trusting the child's natural development and giving that time and space to do this. And I think, of course, that really links to independence, which seems like probably a big part of Emmi Pikler's work or focus as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think with we're sort of using the triangle as a metaphor for that, because of course, the movement development starts long before a child is able to use the triangle. But it's a really beautiful metaphor, and using Charlotte's phrase as the tip of the iceberg that she uses, in the article. It really is, it's a really great representation of this idea of taking one step at a time, and really to emphasize what Charlotte was saying, because children need to really practice and master a skill before they're ready for the next one. And if they're allowed to do that in their own time, then their mastery is complete, and they are able to really I mean, not only is it better for their physiology and their, all their muscles and everything else that they're toning and using in the correct order, whatever. It's also emotionally, if you liken it to when you're learning a new skill, you could be learning a new, I don't know, craft technique or something. You have to keep practicing until you get it right. And then when you do, how great does that feel? And then you like to maybe share it with your partner or tell someone else about it. And then they acknowledge you and say, oh, that's really great. These are the kind of things and interactions and experiences that we want for our children. And if we rush them by sort of putting them at the top of the triangle, for instance, before they know how to get there themselves, then we're really robbing them of that experience.
That's a really good point.
I think there's something so amazing about the joy that a child gets when they actually really achieve something for themselves. And we do find in our society that children do look to us for validation. But that's just because we've almost programmed them to have that, that desire, that within them. But actually, when you watch children really carefully and you see a child kind of really master something for themselves, sometimes it's that inner satisfaction that's it's just beyond magic. It really is. And I think that another thing that you focused on, Angelica, was this idea of observation. I think that for Pikler, that's key. They know their children so incredibly well because of the really careful attention that they pay to the child, and also a kind of understanding within ourselves that we do project and we can anticipate what a child is going to do next or how they're going to react. But actually, if we give children the space, they often surprise us with them, with their creativity, with their play, and it's just being able to give them that that space and time to be able to develop that for themselves.
Yeah, and from the article, I could kind of read that as well. It seems like the approach is also emphasizing a real like unhurried approach, slowing down and allowing children to just be rather than rushing them to the next step every single moment of the day, really. And I think you mentioned even kind of like medical professionals and things that we know about children in terms of their development, that there is that focus of the next step and the next step, and they've achieved this now, and now the next kind of developmental aspect or progression point of their bodies is this and it's that, and it's that hurriedness. And of course there's a narrative of school readiness. It all kind of fits into that, doesn't it, unfortunately? And we even see that with the youngest children, of babies as well, with that developmental aspect too, and the language and everything like that.
Yeah, no, precisely. And it's interesting. Yeah, so a couple of things you mentioned there. I mean, talking about the whole school readiness question. I mean, this, as you said, now this is coming down and down and down right to babyhood. Where people, how do we get our babies and our children ready for school? And actually, it's going to be the focus of our conference that we're going to be holding at the end of September. So we'll talk a bit more about that later. But it's really what certainly I've learned, and I think anyone for whom the Pikler approach really resonates, what we've learned is that by allowing children to be where they are, so at the level that they're at, for as long as they need to be, we give them the opportunity to really master that level of whatever it is, whether it's social skills, movement skills, they're playing, all these different things, verbalization, whatever it is. If we let them be there and really observe, not only do we notice so much more about what they are capable of, which helps to feed us as caregivers and also make us feel good, because of course we're important too, but also really helps the children to feel trusted and feel valued for who they are right now. Because the message that we are giving a child by saying, okay, you've done that, quick, what's the next thing? Is like, well, is this not of any value? Am I not of any value? Because is what I can do not valuable? And that, I think, is a really important message that we don't realise we're giving to children, that they're not good enough as they are.
And this was something that Pikler explored back then in the 1940s. Her first book was titled something along the lines of, what can your child already do? So she was giving that message to parents, let's not think about what they're going to do next. Let's just, let's really hone in on what they can do now. And I think that it's just a societal thing, Angelica. I think that our culture is very much about the next step and the next step. And of course, as we mentioned in the article, nowadays with social media particularly, everything seems to be about comparison. And for our children, that's a real social pressure, because our parents are under pressure, and that then translates to their interactions with their child. And I think it's time now to be able to really focus on, the essential competencies that our children have, and to not be thinking, okay, so we've ticked this box, let's move straight on to the next step. And I think that having a piece of equipment like the Pikler triangle in our homes, with the understanding of what it's there for, and not something that we would assist our child with, but something that we can watch them interact with at their own pace, is a really lovely thing to have around. I think that is a key message. I think that if we're kind of holding our hands, say, for example, over the triangle, and we're kind of, guiding our children up it, then there is a really good chance that accidents will happen. If it's left, the triangle's left in the room, and maybe the child has some time with it alone, there is a chance that an accident could happen because they've not actually had those the time to develop those skills. But if we're alongside the child and we're watching and we're patient, then they just actually become incredibly competent with pieces of equipment like that. And I think I said in the article that I'd come along in my childcare setting and find a child, that unexpectedly really close to the top of the triangle, just standing there, just hanging out in their, sort of their sense of achievement. But it was because they'd approached it really gradually, and they'd not had that assistance, that it was something that had come from within themselves. They'd watched their friends and older children kind of approach it, and there's so much joy to the triangle as well. It can be played under, you can make dens out of it. Children like to sit on the rungs and sort of swing their legs, and there's so much to it, just because it is, I suppose, simple.
Yeah.
And I think, sorry, can I just touch on maybe some of the safety aspects which you just mentioned as well, Charlotte? Because I think there's one of the things that we're sort of charged with, if you like. We have an association. We are associated with the Pikler Association in Hungary, in Budapest, which is, the kind of the heart, the root of the approach. We have a beautiful relationship with them. They run trainings for us, and we go and do our, still are visiting there to do our own training. But there's, if you Google Pikler triangle, you're going to come up with lots of possibilities of these triangles that you can buy, these triangular. It's actually officially like a triangular ladder for anybody who doesn't know what it is. I mean, it just looks like a triangle. So we call it the Pikler triangle. But there are many of them out there which are, they look like a Pikler triangle, but the design of the official Pikler triangle was really, really carefully thought out. The spacing between the bars, the size of the bars for the grip of a child of a certain age, getting the height correct, the number, not necessarily the number of the rungs, because you can buy smaller ones and larger ones. But how where the bars are at the top. Some people have two parallel bars rather than one singular bar, and all these different kind of things, as well as the obvious safety things like whether it's one that folds, making sure it locks and doesn't have anything sticking out that the children can catch themselves on if they do slide or walking past it. But it's quite it's actually a properly designed piece of climbing equipment, and I think we would love for people to recognise that. We occasionally have to follow up someone who says they've made a Pikler triangle for sale. And we have to say, well, actually, sorry, you can't use that name because it's not officially a Pikler triangle.
Oh, I see.
And I think so. There's that sort of element which we just want to highlight, so that people at least know what they're getting. They can choose whichever one suits them in their setting. We're not judging people for buying. It's very hard to get hold of an official Pikler triangle at the moment because as yet they're not being manufactured here in the UK. But so there's that element, but there's also the element, as Charlotte was saying, about safety. So for children, say you introduce a Pikler triangle into your home or setting, and children who have not been given these opportunities for free movement from birth are approaching this. They won't have the same sense of their own balance and capabilities necessarily as a child who has been given these opportunities. So I think it's good to also highlight that those children will need a little closer attention or accompaniment by an adult initially while they begin to negotiate this. So I just wanted to say, for anyone who may already be using something like this, and it doesn't have to be the Pikler triangle, but other climbing equipment, it is possible over time to very gently step back and to help, maybe verbally just guide a little bit with children and say, oh, I wonder, maybe you could put your hand here. Or, rather than actually moving them or placing them, just to give them that sense of, oh, okay, I can work this out for myself.
Yeah, and they've got that sense of autonomy, and it supports their not only independence in terms of, I think when we say independence, when we talk about children's movement, we think about that physical independence, but actually it's that cognitive decision making, problem solving, that independence there that's really vital for them to experience.
That's it, exactly. It ties in really nicely with the sort of nature-based work that we have here in the UK. It's about risk-taking, isn't it? It's really important for our children to just be able to take risks, because if they're micromanaged throughout their childhood, where does the ability to navigate life come from? And I think, like you say, it's that true independence. It's not a tokenistic thing. It's about, enabling some real sort of core competencies that are very much beyond physical. It's an emotional thing as well, isn't it? Really, it's just essential.
Yeah, and
for
I think
sure.
and again, talking about these core competencies and giving them this, independence, which leads to a kind of resilience, and the risk taking, which gives them, the problem solving opportunities and all of that. Again, if we talk about school readiness, it's a real top down approach, like so many approaches these days, where this is school, we want them to be ready for that. So what do we need to do earlier in order to make them ready, rather than this kind of, the Piklerian approach is so much about where they are now, and coming from a sort of a bottom-up approach. And again, that's a lovely, with the metaphor of the ladders, the triangles of having one step at a time. But in fact, it makes perfect sense if we think about it logically, that allowing the children to find their way one step at a time, rather than projecting downwards from the top, is safer, more secure, and just more practical, even in so many ways. There's much less work for the adults too in that situation, in that we're not constantly trying to make sure that they're reaching the next step, or we're not constantly having to hover around to help or assist. But we can actually spend really valuable, really precious time with the children, just being by their side, because obviously we do need to make sure they're safe and that they have, emotionally and physically, and that we're creating and assisting them in, these beautiful environments. But I think it's, again, it's trying to take away this top-down approach, view this as a bottom-up approach, and trying to take that into all elements of children's education. I mean, how far do you want to take it? I mean, you could take it right up to university, I think.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Definitely.
In our training, Pikler, the people at Pikler House will often talk about teaching for the future. And it is that sort of sense of incrementalism, which is obviously just, you could translate that just as Rachel said, as a step-by-step approach. It's kind of, say, for example, getting ready to go outside when we're in a childcare setting and we're getting ready to go for some play outside. If we're always just putting the children's shoes on for them, or we're always helping them with their zips on their puddle suits, where does the learning come? And it's so easy, isn't it? It's so easy for us as adults to be able to just do that for them, and for us all to get out very quickly. But if we step back and we're patient and we take the time and we do that with the children, what gifts does that bring? It doesn't just bring independence for the children. It makes things so much easier. The atmosphere in a cloakroom is very different because the children, they're doing it for themselves. They're, the pace is a lot slower, not as stressful. But I think it's also, as Rachel touched on, it's a real gift for us as adults to see that world of the child where the child is just so incredibly present. And for us, as adults, we're so stuck in the future and the past, and we're actually we're not very good at just being in the now. But if there's anybody that can teach us that the best, it's the children that we're alongside. It's just their way of being, and it's a real gift. It really is.
Yeah, being present more. We definitely need that in this fast-paced world. And I know that the article that your colleague wrote for the Voice of Early Childhood around the Pikler approach and Emmi Pikler, that talks about the fast-paced world we live in now, and how actually Emmi Pikler really emphasized that slowing down approach that I mentioned earlier. I was also going to mention something kind of going back to what we were talking about furniture. It really made me think of something that not considered before. And obviously there's a lot of implications here for children's furniture design and choosing what furniture to buy, as we discussed. But I think it's we can actually even perhaps problematize. This is kind of what I'm like. I'm thinking out loud here now. Problematize risk taking and risky play here, because I feel like some play equipment and some environments can be too challenging for children, even when we are thinking about what allowing them if they choose a tree to climb and what we allow them to climb, they might actually be pushed too much and are not able to develop at their own pace, as you say, with enough challenge, and not gaining that reassurance from a sense of achievement. It's just that challenge is too much, if you know what I mean. And I guess that's what made me think, when you were saying correct furniture, correct dimensions, that Pikler and kind of her educators were creating and designing. And I think this links to Vygotsky and the zone of proximal development and scaffolding, and just making sure the child is at that right point where they are challenged enough, but not too little and not too much as well, if you know what I mean. That's kind of what I'm thinking here.
That's exactly right. The way that Pikler practitioners work is, through that careful observation. So they're making sure that the equipment is absolutely exactly right for the children. And so, if a Pikler practitioner was looking at a tree, then they might be thinking, okay, well, this tree is what sort of that kind of frustration that might come within the child if they can't reach up high enough to be able to reach that branch. We don't want that for the child. We want to be able to give them something that they can really, sort of come to terms with. It's actually quite interesting because Rachel and I were talking about this little anecdote that I have from a group of children that I worked with a few years ago. And we used to go to a sort of old quarry site. It's a forest school site, but one of the sides of the quarry was muddy and sort of littered with little saplings and trees and things like that. And every single week, all the children wanted to do was to climb the slope. That was, we could try and distract them into something else, but for them, that was it, all that they wanted. It was their drive. And what they would do is, each week, just like the Pikler triangle, they would just get a little bit higher and a little bit higher. And they did that as a group. It was really lovely to see. Sometimes, it was so steep that they'd kind of, they'd cling onto, one of these trees and sort of pull themselves up and have a little rest, which is very normal actually for Pikler, for Pikler children to, like they have a bursts of energy and sort of time of intense learning, but then they know how to sort of regulate and to rest and kind of assimilate the information that they've kind of gained from the world around them. And so these children would be kind of sitting in these little almost sort of clumps in the trees, kind of thinking, right, okay, well, how do we get to the next bit and the next bit? And it was perfect. Nature lends itself so perfectly to that opportunity for children to go as far as is right for them at that time. And I think, like we were saying about a tree, it may well be that that there's not an awful lot that they can do with that tree that's too much for them for a while, except for dangle off the lower branches. But they're still discovering that world of nature all around them, and eventually they'll get to that point where they can kind of hold themselves up, and it's just giving our children the chance to be able to do that. So with this slope, one day a particularly sensitive child who we kind of had to really support a couple of months before this particular day, because they'd stung themselves by a nettle and they'd kind of cried for a couple of hours, and it had all been really too much. And she started to fall down the slope, and we kind of thought, oh crikey, what's going to happen here? Because we were concerned that she might be just really upset. And because she'd interacted with that hill for so long and it was hers and she'd felt that sense of achievement, she felt really connected to it. She was just laughing, full of joy, ready to just jump up and go straight back up again, because she knew that sense of achievement. She knew her parameters, and she knew what she was capable of. And so it was all just part of her learning. Now, if we'd taken her to the top of that slope and let her go, what shock and sort of distress and possible trauma would have unfolded from that experience, because she had owned it and it was right. She'd found the way. And I think that's the thing. We have to trust that the children can find their way to, it's particularly out in nature, to the safest, the most, the kind of the way of being alongside a tree or whatever it is. If we can give them that, it gives them everything. It really does.
I love that story.
It's a lovely story, isn't it? And really, to me, this also then highlights how the attitude of the adult is one of the most important things. So Charlotte was talking about observation as well, and it's key in every, we talk about three kind of main aspects of the Pikler approach being like the care, the play, the movement. But there's an overarching theme, which is if you don't really deeply observe the children, taking that time to really, you can be doing other things. It's not like you have to sit there, with your notebook and writing everything down. But if you're really on a level with them, not trying to constantly create opportunities or make things happen for them all the time.
And kind of like control them.
And control them and lead them and guide them and set up activities and all of this kind of thing. If you really are just able to spend whatever time you can just being with them and really noticing them and getting to know them, it gives you, I think, more confidence in their capabilities. But I think what people come up against is an inner kind of block to doing that. Because, I think there's a kind of innate thing in all of us as adults working with children and also as parents that we should be teaching our children.
Yeah.
And I always say, yes, we should be teaching our children, but what we need to do is choose what it is we need to teach them. We don't need to teach them how to move or to play. We need to teach them what maybe the social norms are over time so that they know what's acceptable and unacceptable behaviours, perhaps. And we need to teach them that they can trust us and that we trust them. And so there's a very different idea there than the sort of teach them how to sit up, teach them how to roll over, teach them how to, walk, all of these things, which we naturally go to because people have been doing that for hundreds of years. It's not like this is a new thing. There are ancient paintings from the 15th century or something of children in walking apparatus. So it's not, these things are not new.
Yeah.
But that doesn't make them okay, so it can be very hard, and especially for those people who go into childcare because they just love playing with children. It's a very natural idea it's one of the many reasons that people give when I talk to caregivers about why they go into childcare. Sometimes it's convenience, sometimes it's a real passion for educating children. Sometimes it's because they like playing with children. We have to really examine our own reasons for being with the children and explore what it is the children themselves actually need. It's putting the children at the center of all of our thinking and planning and environment decisions, rather than what can we do as adults to make this happen, make that happen, or whatever. It's really a whole shift in perspective.
Yeah.
If we take it to the extremes, we need to be able to get those who are creating like the policies and everything else around childcare to see this as well. That shouldn't be a big job, but somehow that also feels like a really big job to get people to really see the children for who they actually are. They're little people just like us. We were also their age once. It's not like a them and us situation.
Yeah.
We're all the same. We're all human beings. What do we need? How would we feel in that situation, whatever the situation is?
You're right, Rachel. And I think you touched on the socialization aspect of it as well. And Pikler has a real kind of take on that as well. It's not micromanaging children's social experiences with each other. It's being able to kind of just be alongside the children, so that then they're not being, a piece of equipment isn't being taken from them, given to someone else, because there's a sense of fairness, or it's all about kind of being able to relate to both, say one child takes something from another child. It's being able to kind of relate to both of those children's social and emotional experiences at that time, and trying to think about, how it can be managed so that each child comes away with a sense of fairness, a sense of, that their play drives haven't been kind of diverted, and that there's a complexity to that, I suppose, in some ways, with the way that Pikler looks at that. But it's simple, really. It's just about supporting all children that are in front of us at the time. I think we really are the Pikler triangle is very much the tip of the iceberg, because there's so much to learn and know. Rachel and my journey, has been over the last sort of 5 or 6, for you, Rachel, longer years of going along to Pikler House in Budapest, and kind of really getting to understand this really amazing take on just being alongside children. It's just fascinating. And like you said, Rachel, as well, what drives people to want to work with children? It may well be that they enjoy playing with children, but I would say those same people are really fascinated with the child and with the child's play. And you can kind of come at that from that angle, sort of let's really watch how this child plays when they're given the opportunity to do it on their own terms. And you see caregivers starting to light up and, just be really excited about the different ways that the children are interacting with toys and pieces of equipment, because they're not managing it. And actually that gives them that sense of satisfaction in their work and makes them, feel, I don't know, a renewed enthusiasm, I suppose, for being alongside children, which is really lovely to see.
And one of the aspects of the training, the Pikler training that we've attended, but also any kind of workshops or introductory things that we also run for people, maybe in their settings or whatever, it's a really kind of practical, sort of experiential element. It's not all just like listening to lectures, making notes, maybe watching videos, but we actually do stuff too, which really helps to bring some of these children's experiences back to us as adults, because we've all had these experiences, or had the, hopefully had the opportunity to explore things for ourselves, and can perhaps relate to what it means to play, for example. But by actually bringing back into the kind of lived experience of the adult, how it feels to really explore an object, or how it feels to move freely in certain ways. It really helps to embed this whole approach and give us, again, that kind of really clear, maybe fresh sense of how we can look at children and their lives and their experiences, and again bring us back closer together, so to stop this separation between adult and child. It's absolutely great for us as adults to also be playful and to experience what we can do with ourselves, whether it's bodily movements, all the kind of creative stuff that we all do. And it's just such a meaningful experience when we do it, isn't it, Charlotte? We just have we have fun, but we also go quite deeply into our, you have to sort of be a little bit prepared to touch something a little bit deeper inside. And I think that just makes everything so much better for the children we're then working with. And the only other thing I thought of when you were talking, Charlotte, I wanted to also mention is that you were talking about, maybe a slightly conflict situation or something where, we're not asking the children to share objects and things, but being with both the children in front of you rather than sort of creating a good and a bad or a right and a wrong. The children are learning about what's acceptable, what isn't, what happens if I do this, what happens if I do that. And really, for very many years in the children's lives, then I think when we class them as good or bad, naughty or nice, we're doing them so many so much disservice, because, and so again, we look at how we communicate, what language we use. We take judgment completely away and make observations about what we see. And even so, going back to the idea of the triangle, oh, you've reached the top and now you're coming back down again, or something. We're not saying, yay, look at you, woo, and kind of making a big deal out of it, because that also creates an expectation. So we're trying to just keep it really real, right here, right now. It's mindful, it's observational. We're sharing what we've seen. We're really acknowledging the child and their achievement, but without trying to overplay it and make it something that they feel like they've got to keep repeating.
Yeah, so then
making it performative somehow, rather than just experience. I mean, you can feel all those lovely feelings and go, yay, they've done it. But you don't have to, it's lovely to share that with the child when they turn to you with a big grin on their face and you go, yep, I saw you. You've been working so hard and now you've done it. It's great.
And it goes back to what you were saying at the beginning there. I can't remember which one of you was mentioning this. It might have been you, Charlotte, in terms of that intrinsic motivation, essentially, is kind of what you were saying, of the child's own sense of achievement rather than the adult kind of putting that on the child. And that's exactly what you're saying here, Rachel, as well. I think that's a really good link to have there, and that independent thought as well. That's really important, to kind of them feeling I've done this, I can be proud of this, I've achieved this, and that reassurance that comes from within.
Yeah. I mean, self-esteem and anxiety seem to be, or low self-esteem and anxiety seem to be real burgeoning difficulties for people throughout our society these days. You hear so much talk about, poor mental health and all of these things, and actually giving children the best start in life. There's a lot of work to be done on poverty and equal opportunities for everyone right from birth. But, the work that we as caregivers can do is so important, because we have these children in our settings, or, as parents in our homes, for so many hours a week, that this can give them a really safe and lovely place to really learn about who they are and start to build that confidence that will give them the self-esteem, and to really give them that sort of steady, strong sort of feeling of who they really are, in order to be able to take some of that with them when they then do move out into the world of school and education. I mean, it's one part that we can play, but I think it's a really, really vital one.
It really is, Rachel, and it goes back to what we were talking about originally, school readiness. Does school readiness mean being able to hold a pencil, or or to be potty trained, or to toilet learn, as we like to call it in our world? And we need to, our children need to know themselves, and to not be carrying anxiety with them into those first few months and years of school, but to really, feel confident and happy in their own abilities. And this is the perfect forum for that to happen. And they're not striving for the next thing. They're sitting, within their competencies. And really, what more could we ask for as parents and educators for our children than for them to be, ready within themselves? I think school readiness is a very strange concept in that way.
Yeah. Well, I think before we kind of extend this conversation any further, it's important to mention your conference in September that you picked up on earlier. So please do tell all of the listeners and viewers about this, because especially if they want to find out more about the Pikler approach, but also if they're interested in, obviously you mentioned the notion of school readiness and kind of tackling that, I guess that this would be a perfect place to do so.
Yeah, so the conference is on Friday, the 26th of September, and we're holding it in quite a lovely setting of the townhouse at Kingston University, which we're really looking forward to. It's quite a lovely building. I mean, we've been very fortunate to be allowed to use it. So we're going to be we're going to have 4 or 5 speakers. We're still finalising the absolute final details, but we'll all be very clear on our website very soon. But it will be a day of talking about a lot of what we've been saying about sort of trying to build these beautiful relationships between those caring for children and the children in order to really give them this resilience that they need, and to make the opportunities for the children to become themselves. We'll also be hopefully talking about free movement and the importance of that. So bringing that down and showing again how the idea of school readiness should be flipped on its head. Instead of us preparing them for school, not only should schools be ready for the children coming towards them, so school readiness as in schools being ready rather than the children, but also that by doing this very slow step by step, only when you're ready approach, we are then allowing the children to ready themselves for what comes next. And, certainly in my experience of running parent-child groups and seeing these children who are allowed to kind of do their thing, and I'm sure in your experience too, Charlotte, with the children in your setting, when these children are given these opportunities, particularly around the movement and the play, they get to all the same milestones in their time on a level with the averages of every other child. But there is something very deep and profound about somehow that look in their eye, that wonderful balance that they have, and the poise and the confidence. And this is what we'll be talking about, is just giving children these kind of opportunities. And we have we have a website, so the details of that will be on our events page. As I say, we're just finalising the details now, but we've got some exciting speakers coming up, and we're going to be it's going to be a full day of lots of exploration of these topics.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, we'll be sure to share the link in this episode description for everyone who's listening and watching. And I was going to say that when you were talking about the notion of children developing physically in a natural way, and I guess in quotations, maybe some people might interpret that as like leaving them to it kind of thing. I think this is something that we'll be able to discuss further in the episode coming up around, I guess, problematizing tummy time and questioning whether tummy time is actually good for babies. So that's something that our viewers and listeners can look forward to. And now that we've kind of shared that and also that this episode is coming up, maybe you can start to think of reflect on your own practice or working with your own children or children in your care in settings, and thinking about problematizing tummy time and kind of considering obviously if you are a believer in it and you support children with it, then the pros, but then also thinking about, well, maybe there are some aspects, maybe even hearing this episode, that are now perhaps you could question. So that is something I think we could leave our listeners with, that thought ready for the next episode coming up. So that's quite exciting. And anyone who's listening as well can, of course, read the article by Charlotte, who, I believe, Charlotte, you wrote the article in terms of what we were talking about today. So everything in there, kind of almost like a bit of a summary of what we discussed. So everything, you can kind of solidify your knowledge there. And if you've got reflections bouncing around everywhere, then reading that might help you to kind of really see everything a little bit clearer. And then there's some key takeaways and reflections there to have as well. And of course, the Emmi Pikler article on our Pioneers page on the Voice of Early Childhood. So all of those links to the extra reading as well as the conference is in the episode description for everyone listening. And finally, a really big thank you to both of you for coming on the podcast, sharing your knowledge, your insight, unpicking things a little bit further, a little bit deeper as we discussed. And thank you to Pikler UK for sponsoring as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Angelica. It's been lovely to speak to you.
Yeah, it's been a really lovely experience. And thank you for letting us just really, share all this stuff that we're so passionate about. Thank you.
Yeah, and it really comes across, and I'm looking forward to speaking with you again soon and sharing with all of our listeners.